Hello everyone, this is Pamela Topchian. Today we're going to talk about C-PTSD. Now, we have heard of PTSD and usually associate that with people who have been in war zones or people who have had a traumatic event happen to them. Usually something like, whether if it's not war zones, maybe a car accident or people who were in the 9/11 attacks, things like that. A big event that caused trauma, and then later in life, they're still suffering the post effects, the post traumatic stress from that trauma. And obviously, post is from the past, right? So, when it comes to CPTSD, that is chronic or complex, continuous. All of those words work in there. However, according to the doctors and psychiatrists, and as far as for diagnostics, it is complex. That's what it stands for complex. So we're not here to diagnose you or to ask you to self-diagnose yourself. We're just trying to get an awareness of what it is so that you can maybe have some self-awareness and see where these things come from, whether it's in yourself or a loved one, or something that you might want to bring to your therapist if you're in therapy, if this has not come up yet. So it's a trauma-related condition, as I mentioned, that develops after repeated or ongoing trauma throughout your life. Most likely it's from childhood. It could be from things like domestic abuse or things like being in a cult or trafficking situations. It's just prolonged abuse or emotional abuse or abandonment. Or when it comes to children, it can be growing up with an alcoholic or abusive or neglectful parent or family or caregiver situation. And that would be ongoing throughout your life. Or these other things that I mentioned that sometimes happen in adulthood is there's child trafficking, there's being SA'd throughout your life. There is, and I'm being careful with the words I use, so if you have a question about what some of these acronyms mean that I'm going to say, feel free to ask in the comments. But it's just ongoing. So CPTSD includes a lot of the same kinds of symptoms that PTSD does. So flashbacks, nightmares, avoidance or disassociation, or being constantly on edge, being really aware of everything that's going on, and then maybe having feelings that something terrible is going to happen. And you just need to be hyper aware in your mind. This is how you feel. I need to be hyper aware so that I can be prepared for it. Because a big part of this is not having control over your life, feeling like you have no agency over your life. And so, as an adult or later on in adulthood, after the trauma, after what you've been through, you of course don't want it to happen again. So you might be constantly on edge. But again, you might also be numb and shut down. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, you're so stoic. You're just emotionless, or self-contained." You might also have feelings of shame or guilt, or feeling that you're worthless or that you're somehow broken because you don't interact or have these same types of social interactions as other people, and not really understanding where this comes from. So I must be broken. There's something wrong with me. Or shame or guilt around what you've been through. So this is where therapy, or I've talked about a lot of times journaling, writing it out, talking to somebody, or, I've written my memoir. I've talked about it on podcasts. So I was diagnosed with CPTSD in 2016, I think. So talking about it in therapy, writing my book, talking about it on podcasts, it kind of helps people to know that they're not alone through these different things that go on. It helps people know that there's nothing broken about them or nothing to be ashamed, that these things happen to people. You're not the only one, and you are being validated for your feelings. Also, to bring these situations out in the open so that they're not so hidden and people don't feel like they're secrets and they have to be ashamed and things don't need to be swept under the rug. But it's healing for the person talking about it or writing about it. And even if you don't want to, or you're not comfortable publishing a book, you're not comfortable going on podcasts or talking about it in a video. So I did another video from breakdown to breakthrough, and I'll put that link below. And I think, maybe I'll put the links below for my books too. But even if you're not comfortable being completely out there in the open as I am, just writing about it in a journal is very helpful. It gets it out of you. It's been stuck in there, and so many times these stuck emotions and feelings and just these stuck traumas can cause physical trauma as well. A lot of the issues that I talked about in my last solo video about immunity, those autoimmune diseases and inflammation, and I talked more about diet and things like that and supplements and stress. Holding those things in can also cause these kinds of symptoms for you. But I would say that therapy is one of the most important things. If you recognize any of this in yourself, if you have been holding something in, and a lot of times people might not even think of it as trauma from your past. Say you grew up in poverty and you were neglected. You didn't have caregivers or adults that in your life that were alcoholics or physically abused you or anything. But even just neglect could possibly cause PTSD, because neglect is a form of abuse, even though it wasn't intentional. It's still a form of abuse. You did not get your needs met. And I'm not just talking about maybe not having enough food, maybe not having newer clothes that fit you, whatever, not having a stable environment. But I'm also talking about not having any kind of emotional support in your life, or being alone and not having any kind of guidance or example, never feeling that you mattered, never having your feelings talked about, never having your emotions, never feeling safe expressing yourself, things like that. But of course, it could be a lot of those other more awful things. And a lot of times these things go together. So if you grow up in poverty and you're neglected, you're more likely to have other things happen to you. If you live in areas where the poverty level is very high in the place that you live, and you might have, if you're alone, and you might be SA'd, or you might just more likely to be in traumatic situations. But these kinds of things happen at all socioeconomic levels. So therapy is so important, as I said, and like I said, you might not even know that you have anything to go to therapy for, but you're having nightmares, or you don't feel safe, or you feel emotionally numb all the time. And some of these things can also show up in relationships, like codependency, or you're always being told that you're too needy, or the opposite, where you're always being told that you are emotionally unavailable. So those kinds of things can happen in relationships. Or you self-sabotage because you're not used to having that kind of attention or even love or care with somebody else, and or you feel you don't deserve it deep down. You wouldn't maybe recognize that, but deep down you might feel that way. So you self-sabotage and do something or break up with them before it gets too close. So you've maybe never had a close relationship, or you attract people or are attracted to people who are going to control you because that's all you know, and that's what you know of love. So that's just a few examples of how it can show up. So back to therapy, there is all kinds of therapy. And in the last video about immunity, which I will put below, I talked about trauma-informed therapy and trauma-focused therapy. And this is where you will feel safe and you feel comfortable and that you don't have to relive any situations. There's EMDR, there's different somatic types of therapies, there's parts-based therapies like internal family systems, and you can learn regulation for emotional safety, emotional regulation, and just coping skills for any triggers and for what you might be going through, as well as learning to feel your emotions. So you might also have little things that you do, sort of idiosyncrasies that you do that you don't really understand why. And I'm going to give you a couple examples. So for me, I was essayed in a bathroom. I was about 12 years old, I think. I always lock the bathroom, and I am very private about being in the bathroom. My husband will tell you I do not like to be talked to when I'm in the bathroom. Don't talk to me. Wait till I come out. But I always have to lock a door. And if I'm somewhere else and I have to use their bathroom and I can't lock the door, there's no lock on a door, I'm very uneasy about it. And it brings up these feelings of, I guess, unsafety. And I know exactly where it came from, and I know that I'm safe now, but I still have that little idiosyncrasy where I'm always locking the bathroom door. If I'm home alone, I'm going to close the door and lock it even. So that's a little, that's just a little thing from that experience. Another thing is I have a real hard time letting myself cry. I might feel like I have to cry and I can't let it out, or I have a very hard time. Or if it starts to, I just automatically stop myself. It's an automatic response for me. And I know exactly where that's from, and I've shared this before. When my sister was killed in a car accident and I was 13, an adult told me right in my face, pointed at me, and said, "You don't cry. Don't you cry. You be strong for your mother." And I went into almost like shock mode. I didn't show any emotions for a long time. And so I did have a major mental breakdown, which I talked about that I'm going to share that video below. And I did cry. I was crying then. And I was an adult after my second divorce and had been through two toxic, abusive relationships, marriages. So after that second divorce, I had a major mental breakdown. At that point, I didn't understand how everything in my childhood related to what brought me there. So, but at that time when I had this big mental breakdown, I was crying a lot. But now, even now, after I kind of broke that barrier, and even after therapy, and I understand all that on a logical level, I still have a very hard time. So things like that. So you might have things like that you're like, I don't know why I'm like this. And there might be some things that you need to explore in therapy. So people can heal from C-PTSD, but healing, of course, doesn't mean it didn't happen. It doesn't mean you're going to forget about it. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't matter, because it will always matter, because it's something that happened in your life that greatly affected you. But what it does mean is that it doesn't run your life. It doesn't affect how you run your life. Maybe it does affect you in a way that you're going to lock the bathroom door, or maybe you're going to sleep a certain way, or maybe you're going to have trouble with your own emotions. So it might affect you in those small ways, but it doesn't run your life or doesn't affect your life on a bigger level anymore. You could feel like you have more choices and decisions over your own life and more control over your own life, rather than just having these survival mode reactions. So you can respond in relationships in a healthy manner and learn to identify different feelings in yourself, and then set up, healthy boundaries and learn self-care mechanisms and even self-love. So at the core of healing from CPTSD, from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, is feeling safe. Because that's really the main thing, is if you've gone through something over a period of time, whether it's your whole life or whether it's just several years within your life, and whether it's from childhood or earlier in adulthood, then you feel like you have no control over your life. You feel unsafe. But healing brings that safety back and that control back. So other things that might help, I mentioned therapy, I mentioned parts work, family systems work, somatic work, just things like breath work we've heard so much of, but it can be very helpful. Grounding work, guided meditations, visualizations. Sometimes if you're going through a period of numbness or high anxiety, a quick temperature shift, like a cold shower, a hot shower, putting ice in your mouth and letting it melt without chewing it, gargling water, just putting cold water on your face, putting your hands under very cold water and, rubbing them together under cold water, even taking some sea salt if you have it and letting it dissolve under the water right while you're rubbing your hands together. Those kinds of things can help ground you. Go outside for a walk, do some yoga, do some stretching, even rocking. Just rocking movements can help. So these are just things to sort of signal safety for the body, to signal control over your own body, or to show yourself that extra love sometimes, right? It's not forcing things. It's more of, I have these tools. These are some things I can do. And some things are going to work better than other things for different people, of course. So as you're doing some of these different things or trying some of these different things, you want to notice, be aware of the sensations in your body without any judgment of what they might mean or where they come from, but just noticing what they do within your body, and to be able to have that control to stop that when it starts to feel better or when you notice a shift before it becomes too much. I might be babbling here a little bit, but hopefully it makes some sense. So another thing you will learn in therapy is naming emotions. Man, this is so important. People so often don't realize that I don't even know what this emotion is. And that's why we go numb sometimes, right? Is this fear? Is this grief? Is this sadness? What is this emotion? So learning about the emotions and how they feel and what might be causing that and allowing them in. It can be so easy for people with C-PTSD to shut down those emotions, or feel them so strongly and express them so strongly that you're always being told you're overreacting. So it can go both ways. I talked about writing, whether it's a book or in a journal or whatever, just writing it out. But also writing letters to your past self can really help. And when I talk about recognizing emotions, you also want to be able to recognize when you are responding with a freeze response or a fawning response or a fight or flight type of response or an immediate anger response. Recognizing these responses that are really just you have put in place to protect yourself. That's survival mode. It helps to practice boundaries in your relationships. And I was talking about therapy, and I'm sorry if I'm kind of jumping around here, but I'm just trying to think of different things that are important to say. And I do have some notes on my computer, but that's not really easy to access while I'm talking to the computer. There's group therapies and group sessions and things that can be really helpful. And that's another way to talk about it and get it out of you in a safe space. Like I said, you might not want to be sharing your story on podcasts or on a YouTube channel or with other people. You might not be comfortable with that, or writing a book or anything, but sharing it in a safe space, whether it's with a therapist or in group therapy. Getting creative with art, music, writing, crafting, just any kind of creative expression can be really helpful. Things will sometimes come out that you didn't know you had in you, or it will help bring things up that might not be so fun, but it helps to get it out of you in a safe way. Exploring the spiritual side of yourself, your own beliefs, having a connection with something that can be really valuable. Learning what kinds of things bring you happiness and bring you joy. Learning that about yourself. I think another part of CPTSD is when we don't really have an identity. We don't know ourselves because we were never allowed to just be free to be ourselves. So a lot of times you're kind of going along with other people around you and not really able to find anything that really brings you intense peace or joy or a feeling of authenticity of yourself. So, allowing yourself to explore different things and find that out about yourself and be proud of yourself for trying something new. Very healing to be able to do that. And this goes with therapy too. You might go to this type of therapist and realize that you're not really getting much out of that. So you need to go to a different type of a therapist. Or I've mentioned several times, and on this channel as well as podcast platforms, I talk to so many different types of holistic practitioners, and most of them, they offer so many different, a broad range of holistic healing practices, but most of them have skills and the wisdom and the knowledge on how to help you through CPTSD. I've mentioned it in my last video about immunity. Please do your own research, form your own opinions, find out what feels right and true for you within your heart and your mind and your body and your soul. So I am not a mental health professional. I am not a medical health professional. I am a former retired nurse. I also am a former hypnotherapist. I also hold a diploma in integrative healing arts. But like I said, I also have been diagnosed with CPTSD. And so through that, not only have gone through different therapies and used some of these different types of things to help in my healing, but of course you're going to dig and do your own kind of, not necessarily research, but you're going to look at the research. And so the National Institute of Health, NIH, and APA, the American Psychological Association, and Johns Hopkins. All those three websites are very good, reputable websites to look at some of the real research that's unbiased. You got to be really careful when you're looking things up on what is being written and said, and if anybody who's paying for that research. That's really what it comes down to. So look at that, because that will tell you, is it a certain company that's trying to sell you something that is giving you research that supports what they're trying to sell you? So that's what you need to really look at. So thank you so much for being here. If you have any suggestions for any other topic you'd like me to discuss, it does not have to be so deep and so heavy. It can be something a little lighter. If you like this at all and you're not subscribed, please subscribe and look in the playlist tabs on this channel for more like this, and for the Holistic Connections Conversations with Holistic Practitioners podcast episodes, and those come out every Sunday. Thank you so much. I wish you great healing and great peace.